Going live.
There you are. You are now live.
We are live. So welcome to this podcast on the best books for job seekers. My name is Alison Ainsworth. I am an executive coach and transition expert, and I'm going to be hosting this session with my two colleagues today, Chris Thorne, who's an executive coach and career coach, and Michael, as you can see, 1080 founder and author. So he will get an opportunity to talk about his recently published book. So they've picked a few books that they'd like to share with you in terms of things that have resonated with them for reasons that they will elaborate on as we go through. But feel free to comment, to ask questions, and also to add into the chat any of your favourite books and things that have helped you as you've been looking for a job. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Chris Thorne. I'm a career and executive coach here at 1080, and I mainly work with managers that are transitioning into new leadership roles, as well as people that are obviously experiencing the joys of outplacement. And really excited to share some of these books today because they're resources that I come back to time and time again in that process.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And Michael?
Well, as you said, Alison, CEO and founder of 1080, but obviously I practice in career coach, so I've come up with a selection of books. You said an author. The book is not new. It's over 10 years old, but I have got a new book coming on portfolio careers, but more later.
Yeah, watch this space. Fantastic. Okay, so if we start with yourself, Chris, you're going to talk about the first book, Designing Your Life, and she's holding up a copy. Great.
Yeah, so listen, so this is if you are sitting there wondering, like a lot of people that I coach, what do I do next? Is this really the most satisfying career, and is there more out there? This is a great book to really help you start to figure that question out, because one of the things it does is it really looks at how you can apply the principles of design thinking, which is all about testing and iterating and going again, to that process. And they've got some brilliant tools that I use with people to help them identify what really motivates them and engages them at work. Where do they find that they're most effective and engaged? And also, how do you actually sit there and start that process of figuring out, well, what could the next thing be? One of the things I really love about all the books by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, because I've got another one, is how they get you to reframe things and think out the box and debunk a lot of the myths that keep us stuck. And one of the myths that really keeps us stuck is this idea that there's one passion, and if you don't find it, then that's it, it's all over. And they show you how you can actually identify many different possibilities and use a process known as prototyping, which feeds a lot into the proactive job search model that we encourage our clients to use, where you're testing assumptions. You're going out, you're having conversations, you're getting active, you're doing things. I often tell my career clients that sitting home and waiting for the light bulb moment of what you should be doing is not going to happen. It tends to happen as a process of a lot of small inputs along the way, and how you can really go out and get engaged and energized. And it's a lot more of it's a much better way to approach the job search, because you're doing something. You're not waiting on things. You're being more proactive and taking control of the situation. Shall we go on to the second book, or?
I was just going to say, in terms of that book, does it give you tools and techniques? Does it give you a process to follow, or?
Yeah, definitely. One of the tools I really love as a starting point is something called the Good Time Journal, where they get you to just keep track of what you do during the day, or what you've done during your work day, to look at what really lights you up, what really drains you, and what sort of people or systems or processes, or what are you actually doing at those points when you're most engaged. And they give you different tools to approach the whole decision-making process around what could be 3 potential, what they call Odyssey paths to defining your next step. So yeah, it's very process-led, obviously design thinking being at the heart of it, and really walks you through step by step, lots of great stories and examples of other people and how they've made changes as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, do you want to go into the next one, which is same authors, I should say.
Your new work life. So this book, this builds upon the first book, but it was written just prior to COVID. So what's fantastic about this book is that it really looks at the modern workplace and how can we actually navigate all the change and disruption that's happened, especially since COVID. And it looks at not just how do you find the new job, but it's like, okay, how do I actually look at the job that I'm in and really work out, okay, what could I do to improve it so that I could be more motivated or engaged? Have I got enough meaning or money or impact? And again, more fantastic exercises to really help you unpack this and define, okay, do I need to, sometimes it's not an option to leave the job that you're in immediately. So we might need to kind of reframe that job, decide that maybe we're going to stay for a period of time, kind of re-enlist, or maybe we want to remodel our job, find ways that we can make different tweaks to be doing different things that really do light us up, or how do we completely change or reinvent ourselves by upskilling or reskilling, or if we do relocate, how do we quit well so that we don't burn any bridges, that we leave things on a good note? Because interestingly, a lot of people sometimes come back to their former roles, a concept known as boomeranging. And they look at something that's really important in the modern workplace, which is overwhelm. How do we actually manage this feeling of overwhelm in our workplaces so that we can take back control of our time? And another key area that I really liked, which we'll touch on a bit later, was politics, because that's an area that a lot of people really struggle with to understand how they can be more effective, and really just thinking about how can I future-proof myself. And the red thread that I really like with these is it's about taking ownership. It's about rethinking how you're looking at the situation, using some very good processes, tools, questions to help you look at things from a completely different point of view and actually effectively redesign, where you're going and what you're doing, so you can really enjoy your career and really deliver your best work.
Yeah, great. That sounds like a must for anyone job seeking. So thanks, Chris. Michael, I'm going to come to you and ask you to talk about a couple of books. The first one is the Stephen Dalton Job Closer.
And you mentioned in the banner there, the 2-hour job search. We did do a LinkedIn with Steve where he talked about the 2-hour job search. Although he does slightly contradict himself in this book, because he talks about 100 hours to find a job. So I was a little surprised when I read that in the book, but I do like him. He's what I call a straight line thinker. When I read it, it really resonates with me. And you mentioned the proactive job search, which is very much hand in hand with the 2-hour job search, how you target organizations and how you get in front of them. It's written in a question and answer form, so I like that. And Steve is the master of the acronym. So, and I'll run a couple across you. Those of you who work with 1080 will know we use the STAR model for competency-based interviews. Well, he uses the CAR model: challenge, action, result. For building rapport at an interview, he talks about the RAC model, which is reason, anecdote, connection. And of course, from the 2-hour job search, he's got the FIT model, which I remember his favorite part, insight and transition. And again, how you introduce that into interviews. So it's an immensely practical book. And certainly, you don't have to read it cover to cover, which I like about it. If you've got an interview, Alice and I were talking about a client who's got interviews with, you can read this section on interviews. The other thing I'm going to say, and it's this thing we echo to clients all the time: people fixated on the CV. And that's why it says, 100 hours job search, if it takes you 100 hours, you should only spend 3 hours on your CV. And it makes the point that actually most recruiters spend less than 5 seconds actually reading a CV. On that note, and then Alison, you were kind enough to reference my first attempt at a book. When we launched 1080 over 12 years ago, I'd had over 12 months garden leave. By the way, HR's greatest invention, garden leave. I was able to sit and write down, and I would like to think it's a very practical piece, very much along the work of Steve Dalton, that it takes you through a job search, from thinking about what it is you want to do, based upon your values, your motivators, and your talents, all the way through to negotiating a job offer. And right at the very end, I reminded myself what the key messages were. So, for example, it's down to you. The book's all about do not rely on organizations to manage your career. You've got to have a plan. And I'm going to return to that in a second. It's about sharing your plan with the network. But you must also work in this structured, systematic way. This proactive job search model and Steve Dalton's 2-hour job search model is all about creating your own CRM in order to use your network to effect introductions. And there's lots more. And I could talk for hours on my book, but I'm not going to. Only £9.99 at Amazon. Truly a bargain. Over to you, Chris.
Absolutely.
Well, I was just gonna throw in there, Michael. Firstly, I mean, like with going back to your job closer for a second, I've used those frameworks with coaching clients to help them prepare for interviews, and we've obviously had some very successful interviews and helped people to feel a lot more confident, going into those situations. And obviously, we're quite familiar with, I think it's the Michael Moran, 333 method of segmenting your network to reach out to people and being very proactive about how you're doing this. And I think when you're job searching as well, there's a certain comfort in knowing that you can have these processes and put them in place, because you can't control the outputs, but you can absolutely control the inputs. So you can sit there and go, right, I've reached out to X number of people today or had these many conversations. And I think that really helps mentally when you're trying to keep going sometimes through the job search, is to recognize that you are putting in the right inputs, and the outputs will come as long as you persist.
And if I can add to that, and he used the film analogy, I like the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. So you're absolutely right. It's around controlling the things you can, but if you do the right things, then the job offer will come. It's about doing the right things. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, and I also like what both of you have said about sometimes you have to step out of the process and go back to some of that foundational level. You mentioned it. My 3 foundation stones are: what am I good at, what do I like doing, and what are my values? So values, motivators, and skills, I think very much a starting point for building your brand, but also building everything that you need to go forward. So some great links there. Chris, coming back to yourself, you're going to talk a little bit about clearer thinking.
Yeah. So this was a book, just a very recent book that I read, snapped it up in a W.H. Smith on the way into London, so I'd have something to do on the train, and an absolutely cracking book. A lot of coaching that I do, there's often a lot of decisions to be made, and just helping people to be more effective in that process. It's going to be helpful to you whether you're searching for a job or in your career, and even your just your life in general, because we all have to make a number of decisions. And I felt like this author really broke this process down in a way that was both really easy to understand. Again, it's about taking ownership and controlling the controllables. So he starts off by educating you on, well, what are the factors that get in the way of making effective decisions, which are emotions, ego, social pressures, conforming to social norms, and just the inertia of, staying comfortable, staying in that status quo. When he gives you tools to understand the impact that those 4, I guess you could call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, really can make, and how can you play to your strengths? How can you put things in place so that you don't fall prey to giving into your emotions, or making or getting stuck in, say, paralysis of analysis with the inertia. And then of course he breaks down, well, how do we make decisions? By we need to define the problem, and one of the key aspects is, are we making the right decision? Have we got the right problem? Because we can spend a lot of time and energy on the wrong problem if we're not careful. Gathering the relevant info. One of the safeguards is, how do you make sure you've got the right information from the right sources, not just word of mouth, but accurate information, so you can actually make better decisions? And of course, how do you identify your options, weigh your evidence? Of course, you've got to then choose and commit to an alternative. And one thing he mentions as a safeguard is that often people tend to be a bit overly optimistic. They'll think about what could go well. They won't always think about, well, what happens if it goes wrong? And you have to weigh both sides. And of course, taking action and reviewing reviewing process, putting feedback loops in place so that you get that feedback. And of course, it's again a bit like our design thinking. It's a process of test, iterate, refine. Shane used to work for one of the 3-letter agencies, I think, in the wake of 9/11. So obviously was having to make decisions under extreme pressure with, very little information to go off of sometimes. And so it has a very interesting take. And again, lots of great examples and stories of, how these principles play out in practice, so you can really get to grips with them and embed them. But if you want to learn how to make better decisions and who doesn't, I definitely recommend this one.
Well, it sounds like a good buy on the way from
It was a good buy. Yes, it was very good.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Michael, I'm going to come back to you. We put in some wild cards or some slightly different types of books. So if we start the first one with the Daniel Pink, which again, in terms of career transition, has written a lot of great stuff. But this particular book, Johnny Bunko, is a slightly different version. Although he claims it's the last career guide you will ever need.
Yeah, and funny enough, I didn't see that in the title initially until I was doing my research for the session. I thought, well, it's no mean claim, is it? The last one you'll need. And what's more about it, if you look at it, it's a cartoon book. So one of the things I've deliberately, this two I've picked are different. Because if you go to W.H. Smith or whatever, you'll see 1,000 self-help books on careers. But I don't think you're going to see too many in cartoon. In fact, I think, when was the last time you read a cartoon book? And there's definitely, I'm not that knowledgeable, there's definitely a parallel with Japanese cartoon books, and both the books have a mystical character giving you advice. In Johnny Bunko, it's Diana who pops up, and as he navigates his way through the world of work, she's on his shoulder giving him advice. And I'm going to take some of the things is, for example, she's don't have a plan. You don't need a plan, apparently. But you must follow your interests. So that's, I like what we said about motivations. And surprise, surprise, she says, it's all about strengths, not weaknesses. Again, and those of us who spend all our time talking about networking, and you already thought about the 3s and 3s. Well, the middle 3 is, what have you done for others? And that's Diana's scheme. Have you invested in other people? Because they will help you. She says, persistence will trump talent. Persistence will trump talent. And I'm a great believer in that. My mother, when I was a boy, I had asthma. And it took a lot of time off at school, and she was constantly saying, well, try again, you'll get better if you work at it. So I'm a great believer in persistence. She says, you can make mistakes, but they're excellent mistakes, because excellent mistakes, you learn from mistakes. That's how you learn. And don't be frightened. And lastly, she talks about leaving an imprint. So I think it's definitely worth looking at. And you can, because it's a cartoon book, you can read it in less than an hour. And if Dan's right, it's the last book you'll ever want to buy. Do you want to go to the next one, Alison?
Yeah.
Definitely seems to promote a bit of a growth mindset there, Michael. I really like that.
Yeah. And I think there's a bit of collusion between the two, because this book by a guy called David Thompson, The Magic Blackberry, and I went to his book launch, and he was a former client of 1080, or before 1080, David was. I wonder where he got the idea from. I think he did get the idea from Johnny Bunko, because on this occasion, his character, he loses his BlackBerry on a night out with the lads. And by the way, I'm dating it, aren't I? It's already 10 years old. People don't have BlackBerries anymore. But it would now be the magic iPhone, wouldn't it? But anyway, the BlackBerry, he loses it. And what he gets back from HR, it's notable mention, is a BlackBerry that talks to him, that gives him advice. Gives him advice on relationships in organizations. Particularly around how you build relationships in the organization. And he takes you through a whole series of scenarios, and the BlackBerry speaks to him. Its actual second title is How to Upgrade Your Relationships at Work, a Personal Leadership Fable. And particularly when people for interviews, storytelling is a very effective way of communicating. I think both these books do that. That, you know, they make it, I mean, quite light-hearted. You can question some of the messages coming across, but it'll certainly keep you engaged and neither take that long to read.
Yeah, that's great.
What I'm saying, my two sort of off the wall, sort of out of the box books to read.
Well, we did have a third one, which I think we've got time to cover as well, Michael.
Okay.
And
my last one is Peggy Klaus. Now, the reason I picked this one is that the most common feedback I get, and Alison and Chris, I'm sure you'll bear with me, is that when I talk to clients about you need to take your elevator pitch to the marketplace, you need to get people a message. They all say to me, Michael, I don't like doing that. I don't like speaking about myself. I don't like self-promotion. And it is very American, as you can imagine. There's brag, the art of tooting your horn without blowing it. So when you read the front cover, you probably know what you're going to get. But she does question certain assumptions. So the one I always have is, just by working hard, I'll get noticed. No, you won't. No, you won't. And Peggy's very strong on that. She says you are the best promoter of yourself. But she's very practical. So she says like things you shouldn't do about, and it's much more also about talking about other people as well as yourselves. But she is very practical. Number one, in typical American brash fashion, she says, what about talking about yourself? Just get over it. Go and do it. Yeah. Reach out to people. She talks very clearly about bragging in interviews, which really brings us back to the sort of stuff that Steve talks about how you introduce things that you've done, or as a team how you've done it. What else I'm going to say about it? I think it's really practical. I mean, and as I just researched, I sort of looked at it again, and you can, so for example, there's a chapter on bragging in interviews, so you can just read that before you go. 12 tooting tips for bragging, if I can say that, or be your best authentic self. Think about to whom you're tooting. Say it with meaningful and entertaining stories. Keep it short and simple. Be able to back up what you say. Talk about me. Talk with me, not at me. 10 small talk in a big talk. I won't go next one. That brag-alongs and brag bites, current and fresh. Be ready to moment's notice. Have a sense of humour. And use it all. Your eyes, your ears, your head, your heart. I like Peggy. I thought it was definitely worth a read.
I like the sound of Peggy. I've not read the book, but that sounds great. I love the be yourself, be authentic, be genuine, the head and the heart piece. I love that. Chris, any thoughts from you on that?
Well, yeah, and I would say, I mean, I'd second what you say, Michael, is that this self-promotion is, it's definitely a key. It's like a red thread that runs through a lot of conversations around, careers and interviewing. And yes, you do have to put yourself out there because no one's going to know. And it, interestingly, it ties back, reminds me a little bit back of the politics piece that I was referring to in the Designing Your New Work Life, because they talk about, how do you develop more influence and be more, impactful in an organization? And delivering great work is obviously part of that, but people need to recognize you and know that you've done it. And that's, really it's about visibility and raising your profile. And obviously there's ways to do that without it, being overly in your face and aggressive, but you do have to tell people sometimes what you've done. Otherwise they won't know. And if they don't know, then it's you're kind of a best kept secret, which isn't going to get you anywhere.
I do get, because I think it often is natural for people to do that self promotion, but then you're absolutely spot on. And when you buy a product, 9 times out of 10, somebody's been marketing or advertising it to you. Well, I'm afraid in the world of getting yourself a job, you do need to advertise yourself. And yes, it's great when other people advertise you. That's what your network's doing. But to get your network to do that, they have to be on message. So Without it, you can't work.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Okay, guys, coming to the end of the session, and again, these are just some thoughts on a few books, obviously not exclusive, but in terms of key takeaways, if you were transported to a desert island, if we were going to run our own desert island discs, which book would you take and why? So, Chris, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think of the three that I've mentioned, I'd probably choose the Designing Your New Work Life, because I think it covers the broadest spectrum, I think, from everything in terms of, looking at your career as a whole, in terms of, how to effectively thrive at work and how to navigate disruption, which I think is a key part of everything that we're dealing with, especially in the workplace, and really just really rethinking some very key aspects about work, and also, the way we approach, designing our work and thinking about, what kind of an impact we want to make in that space. So I think for me, because it's sort of an overall, and obviously it's giving you tools that you can use to think through things to make decisions, I think that would be my go-to, and for that, for my desert island choice.
Brilliant. Excellent. And Michael, what about yourself?
Well, I'm obviously going to pick my own book, aren't I?
Well,
I'm going to pick my book. And actually, not for the reasons you might think. Very well, Alison, am I allowed to take a luxury with me? Because whilst I'm reading my book, I want to be listening to I think the Beatles is what I would take with my Beatles collection. But the reason why I would take my book is not because it's sort of the job search advice in it, but more to reflect on, it's now almost 10, 11 years old, but when I was writing it, what was my thinking behind what I was saying? So I would see it as a real good piece of reflection. And I think if you are going on a desert island, reflection is really important. When I work with a client, and particularly when we're at that stage around understanding what's important to you, what motivates you, what you like doing, I like to say to them, now you need to go into a place that you don't normally go to, whether it's a library or it's top of a hill, and just think things through. So this is what you've been telling me. How do I take that and put it into now what I'm looking for? So that's what I would use on my desert island. I would do it for that period of reflection, and my book would help me do that. And by the way, I'm pretty certain I could write a much better book now than I could 10 years ago. So that's what I would do.
Well, we wait and see for the latest publication when it comes out.
It will be out in March. Going Portfolio. How to do a portfolio career.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Michael, and that shameless plug of your book.
I like that idea of going somewhere completely different as well to think about things, because your environment does shape your thinking. And so when you're trying to sit there at the same space or the same room in the house or whatever that you're trying to think through these things, you're getting the same input. So if going somewhere completely different, being in a new environment, can really help you to shake things up. And I think it can be an interesting one for people when you start to say, right, well, we're going to start with like what's important to you and what you're good at, what you like. And they're like, what? I mean, I just need to find a job. It's like, no, hang on a minute. It's like you have an opportunity here to actually really think about what you want out of your career and your life. And, let's take that opportunity and make the most of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Taking people out of their comfort zone sometimes take you to somewhere you wouldn't normally go. And helps to focus the thinking, focus the mind.
I've had a very interesting sort of response to that. So things like going to art galleries, the sort of countryside walks, even I had a client who literally told me he sat in the cemetery for, and why his thinking was, and I liked it. What he said was, well, of course, Michael, all around the people around me were dead. They're no longer here. And I needed to think about how am I going to spend the rest of my life? Which I thought was a very clever thing of doing.
Yeah, very good.
Taking that time to decide what you want to do and doing it in when you've got no other pressures on you.
Yeah, very, very poignant points to finish on. Okay, so if there are no other comments, thank you very much, both of you, for your time and the interesting discussion on books. We haven't had anybody add any comments or books to the list, but feel free to share with us after the event if you do. And also, just to say, our next session in March will be how to be a standout candidate around interviewing. So again, a topic that is very, very live, and we've discussed a few things in the session today about how to get through that process, how to be a standout candidate. So that will be on the 4th of March. So please put that in your diary to join us again at 1 o'clock on the 4th. So thank you very much for your time. So some thank yous coming into the chat now. So thank you. Super Session was mentioned by Sue. So thank you again for watching and or for listening. Okay, thanks, guys.